Well, now, greetings and salutations, everyone. We are still in that great state of Ohio, so we will not be hitting the road and moving on to Oklahoma yet, but we will finish Ohio off today. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch store to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below, my merch displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, and the links to which are also in the description as well. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload. Shall we? Today's first Ohio subscriber submission. Hey Jeff, my name's Jack Quinn. Feel free to use my name if you feel this encounter is worthy of your channel. I was an avid outdoorsman who loved to hunt and fish by myself. Not so much since I found out what's really out in the woods. This particular encounter happened about 4 months ago. I was at my buddy's, we'll call him Mac, at his cabin. It's located in a campground in Ohio. He's been staying there year-round for the last 4 years. The cabin consists of an RV with 3 rooms built around it, with a double deck outside the sunroom. Per rules, you can build, but you have to have an RV on the lot with the ability to hook up and pull it out if you have to. We first became aware of the presence of the Dogman about 3 years ago and started investigating further. We've multiple sightings of 7 different individuals as well as several grassmen / Bigfoot. On this particular night, I had driven 45 minutes down there. It had been quiet outside all evening. We were having a spirited debate about several things when I had had enough. I decided to head back home. It was getting late, 12:30 to be exact. I was walking by the monitor from one of the outside cameras when I heard a dogman's half growl, half bark, and stopped in my tracks. We both stayed silent, listening. Then we heard the familiar creak of the steps coming up to the door. The doorknob started to jiggle ever so slightly. We stayed motionless, very silent. All at once, the floor under our feet rose up. One had gotten under the cabin part. Now we are starting to panic just a little because they've never been so brazen. They've jumped onto the roof before and thrown things at the cabin, but this was a lot more serious. So I went to the kitchen to peek through the curtain to check the back. We heard a noise outside of the bandroom window, which is opposite the door. So Mac went to investigate. We met back into the living room, and he was sweating, whiter than usual. He said that he had gotten down on his hands and knees and pulled the blind in the sunroom, the same side as the bandroom window, to see 2 large dogmen standing there. He said they didn't look at him, but they stepped backwards into the shadows. For the next 3.5 hours, we were silent, with me in the living room watching the door with my .357 Magnum cocked and ready for action. Mac sat up in the sunroom, watching the sliding glass doors, and out onto the deck with his .45 cocked and ready. We could still hear them outside, and I still felt the floor rise up every once in a while, knowing that one was still under there. At around 5 in the morning, I had to go home because I had to get the grandchildren on the bus. My other half would be leaving for work, and it was my job to get the little one on the bus and make sure the other 2 were on the bus. So in a state of absolute terror, where the fear turns to anger, he covers me while I pull the curtains open in the living room and raise the window. We both yell out, "Come on, you sons of, come and get some. We're tired of messing with you." Then everything was silent, so we waited a half an hour, went outside. I jumped into my truck and covered him as Mac walked around to the entrance of the cabin. The door was shut, and everything that was piled against it was put back in different places than they were, but put back nonetheless. It's amazing that they knew how to do all of that. When I drove home, freaked out the whole way, still terrified, got the kids on the bus in time, and went to work. That was the scariest encounter I've had to this day. Thank you, Jeff, for all you do. Jack Quinn. Today's second Ohio subscriber submission. Jeff, okay, let me start with where I live. I grew up here in a little town of Lucasville, Ohio, way back in the hills, and I was at least 8 years old and always liked running through the woods and just enjoyed nature. One afternoon, say about dusk, I was out in my yard sitting in the grass playing with my dolls, and I got this strange feeling that something was not right. I heard no birds, no frogs, nothing. It was just silent. And I felt like I was being watched. I glanced around, frantically trying to spot what it may be. And then it happened. I saw at the edge of the woods on the hill what looked like a dog with no eyes and no nose, just teeth and black holes where its eyes should be. It growled viciously at me. I froze and all of a sudden jumped up and ran screaming to my house. I told my dad, and we went out looking, and it was gone. I never saw it again. Not so planned anyway. That night, sometimes I can tell looking out the windows at the woods and see its red glowing eyes staring back at me, and its horrible growl when the wind blows. So if you ever come around, don't go outside at night. Same subscriber, second email. Hey Jeffrey, we lived in this hovel for most of our lives. There was supposed to be a curse on it. People have been murdered there, and spooky things always happen, like animals that are buried are then seen after they've died. CB, my brother's dog, died, and late one night we could still hear him whine and howl. Sometimes it was like he was at the foot of our beds. Then it went from howls to growls. Late one night, my mom was working in town. It was just me and my brothers. The lights were out. We were almost asleep when we heard footsteps coming towards the door of the house and growling. My bigger brother grabs the gun and I start to cry. It hit the door. Boom! I screamed. Boom again. My other brother took me to the other room and shut the door. And Mark, my oldest brother, kicked the door open and began firing the gun up in the air. It echoed through the night. We glanced out of the window to see what was happening, and we saw this creature run to the edge of the woods and glare back. Its eyes glowed red, and it let out this horrific howl and ran off into the night. We've never spoke of it since, or we have not seen it either. We know it's still out there, watching and waiting. Today's third Ohio subscriber submission. Hey Jeff, how are you? This encounter happened late summer of '95. At the time this happened, I lived in a small town right in the middle of two cities, Dayton and Columbus, Ohio. I worked second shift in Columbus. This meant I would get off of work nightly at around 11:30 p.m. For about a week, coworkers and I talked about three lights we were seeing west of Columbus, seemingly on the horizon towards the direction of Dayton, Ohio. As many know, Dayton is home to the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which, as stories say, was where part, if not all, of the Roswell crash was taken after the famous Roswell crash, as well as the crash from Kecksburg in Pennsylvania. A couple of side notes to this. A close friend was a military police in the Air Force at the Wright-Pat, and when I asked him about what was there, he said that he didn't know, but was told not to set foot in certain parts of the base as he did not have clearance, and if he did go there, he would be shot. Another friend had high clearance in the Army, and when I asked him about it, He said he's never seen anything physically, but had seen documents indicating something was there. Now, back to the lights. The lights moved in a unique pattern. One light would travel slowly up and down on the left side of my field of view. It would travel straight down towards the horizon, then slowly turn and travel up. Once it hit the apex, it would turn back towards the ground and travel down. It did this without fail all night long. Light number 2 would travel parallel to the horizon. However, once it reached the right side of its path, it would turn down slightly like it was going to travel back to the opposite direction, but would disappear, only to reappear literally a second later on the left side of view and continue its slow parallel travel to the right, only to turn down, disappear, reappear on the left, and start the cycle all over again. The third light would travel up and down like number 1, but on the right side of my field of vision. For days, these lights would travel in these patterns. There were 2 ways to get home from work, the highway or the back roads. On one particular warm summer night after work, I wasn't tired, so I decided to enjoy the nice night and drive home on the back roads. This gave me time to focus more on the lights. I don't know what it was, but something in my head said to try to get the lights' attention. It was around 11:45, maybe midnight. So it was dark, but the sky was cloudless, and the moon was so bright it was actually casting shadows. As I drove home this particular night, every time I would turn towards the general direction of the lights, I would flash my high beams. The drive home is typically 35 to 40 minutes. I noticed that about halfway home, the light on the right side started to appear different. While it stayed in the same pattern, I noticed as it went up towards the top of its cycle, it seemed to be bigger, then get smaller as it traveled down in its cycle. After a few moments, I realized why it seemed to get bigger. It was coming towards me. I continued this flashing on my high beams until I was about 10 minutes from my house. By this time, the light on the right I could see was an object. I found a road that pulled off to a drive that a farmer uses as an access field point. I pointed my car towards the light, put my high beams on, left the car running with the radio on, and got out of the car. Over the next 2 or 3 minutes, while the left light and middle light continued to do their thing, the light on the right came towards me. What I saw, I will never forget. It was black, maybe dark blue or very dark gray, but very dark in color. It had wings like a plane, but no tail. Imagine a stereotypical teardrop shape, round at the front and tapering to a point at the end. But on its side, with the round part the front of the object, the wings were swept back at a rather abrupt angle. It made no sound, being that it was in the sky above any frame of reference. It's impossible to say how big it was, but I'd guess 50 to 100 feet long, maybe 45 to 60 feet wide. What made it odd, other than no sound, was that along the edge of the wings, it seems to have round windows that glowed a soft yellow, as if it was lit from inside. There were maybe 5 to 6 windows clearly visible at the rounded front of it, and the end of each wing. It had what looked like yellow stationary spotlight that, while brighter than a port window, shone downwards towards the ground but never actually reached the ground. It floated, as best as I can describe it, since there was no sound, over my car about 65 to 80 feet above me. It was close enough I could see patterns on its exterior, what looked like hashed pattern, very similar to what you'd see in the inside of a recording studio's room to keep in the sound from bouncing around. I initially left my car running and the radio on, as I've seen UFOs tend to disrupt radios and car electronics. As the object floated entirely over my car, It made no disruptions in the radio or car itself. As I watched it float over my car, I remembered the other lights. I turned my head to see what they were doing. Nothing had changed with them. So I turned my head back to see the object, and in the 2 or 3 seconds it took to look at the other lights, the object had disappeared. No noise, no shadow, no puff of smoke, nothing. All I saw was the field behind me, the stars, and the glow of the lights of Columbus in the distance. I looked 360 degrees around me and didn't see a thing of this object. Dumbfounded, I jumped back in the car and drove home towards the remaining 2 lights, still traveling in their specific patterns. The object never appeared again that night while I was driving home. The next night, all 3 lights were in the sky doing the same thing they've done for weeks. But no matter how much flashing of my lights I did, I couldn't seem to grab their attention. I even drove almost to Dayton towards the lights on roads I've never seen prior, but I never seemed to get closer to them. Then, after 2 or 3 more nights of these lights, they disappeared, never to return again. Because of the time this happened, the late 90s, I had no cell phone, much less a camera phone, so I had no chance to take any photos. After that night, I kept a pair of binoculars and a small handheld recorder in my car, but I never saw anything again. Several years later, I spoke to my mother about it, and she said, "Oh yeah, when I was younger, we'd see all kinds of things out that way." It seemed odd to me that these things seemed to stay near the right pat in Dayton, or at least towards that direction. Maybe it was a stealth blimp. Maybe it was an alien craft. I don't know, but it was weird. There are a couple different pictures on this video. The pictures that are on the video are from a subscriber, and he had a very short email to me, but sent the pictures. I'll go over the email. Time of day was roughly 3 p.m. I was sitting on the tire swing and I started hearing noises, so I decided to take some pictures of the surrounding area. The woods are man-made. The trees were planted in certain areas. Very marshy, hilly terrain around the woods, loads of caves and even a small stream. It's about 3 or 4 miles away from the cabin, plenty of wildlife. When you first show up, it gives you a very odd feeling, but it's easy to get over. You don't really start feeling anything until a few days. Then it's when it starts feeling odd. The pictures were taken in Holmes County, Ohio, roughly 3 or 4 miles from any store or home. They're neighbors beyond a 50-acre limit, but I never asked if they've seen anything. I've encountered the Dogman there, but I can save that for a different day. What happened was he was sitting on his tire swing and he saw a Dogman in the distance. It didn't come out at him during that time, but it was there. Very short email, but like I said, some pictures as well. So those are the pictures that you guys are checking out right now. Tonight's final Ohio submission. Hey Jeff, here is my cryptid experience. It starts off last year. It was February of 2017. It had just snowed, about 10 inches or so had accumulated. I live in Ohio, so it's really not a big deal to have a lot of snow on the ground. Where I live is in a development, and behind my house there's a large pond type thing with a creek that runs through it. And across the pond is a basketball and tennis court. The strip of land that the tennis court sits on is probably 500 feet or so. I'm not good with guessing distances, so bear with me. I woke up in the morning after the snowfall and saw these marks in the snow by the tennis court that had to be about 10 to 15 feet apart from each other, like huge giant footprints, spaced really far apart. I thought maybe they were from a squirrel or a deer bounding through, but I've always been a believer in the unknown, Bigfoot, Dogman, etc. So this piqued my interest. That day was way too cold and way too snowy to trudge across to go look and see what the prints were actually of. So a couple days later, when it wasn't so bitterly cold, I walked over to investigate. They are definitely not a cluster of footprints that you would see from a squirrel or a single hoof print from a deer. These were huge footprints. So now I knew it was some sort of large animal or person with a huge gait or the ability to leap very far distances in deep snow. So that's kind of freaky. So I kept that in the back of my mind, but never saw anything else that would make me think of a large cryptid in my little neighborhood. Until a couple of months later. I believe it was the end of May. It was around 12 at night. I was outside smoking a cigarette. Now, this pond has these large drain pipes that lead from my street under my backyard to the pond for drainage. We have raccoon that use these drain pipes as an underground tunnel system. We often hear them fighting and making all kinds of racket at night. And this night was no exception. The distance from my back porch of my house to where I was smoking to the drain pipes is about 50 feet, I'd say. And this night, the raccoons were really freaking out. They were screaming and fighting like crazy. It was loud and echoey from the opening of the drain. The whole neighborhood could hear it, I was sure. So I stepped out from around the brush that blocked my view to see if I could see anything around the pipe, like why the raccoons were freaking out so badly. It was an overcast sky, but it was pretty well lit for being nighttime. When I stepped around the side of this brush, this massive creature stood up from the pond from where the drain pipe was, and it had a raccoon in its hand. Now, I can see why raccoons are freaking out. See, the creature was dark in color, covered in fur. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. When I, being at least 5'10", stand down by the drain pipe, my head and the top of my shoulders can be seen from my house. I could see this thing's torso all the way down to the top of its hips. There was definitely no tail. It had a human shape to it. Even though it was pretty light outside, it was still nighttime, so I couldn't get much detail, other than it was a giant, furry, and dark. I was completely scared stiff. I don't think it noticed me because it never turned around to look at me. Or maybe it just didn't even care I was there. But it had bigger problems on its hand because the raccoon it had grabbed was the one we called Bubba because he was big and fat. Raccoons are not nice animals and they have pretty sharp teeth and claws, and these things were going crazy, biting and scratching, growling and snarling, trying to get out of this creature's grasp. But this creature didn't care. It might as well have been holding a bouquet of flowers. Next thing I know, it lifted the raccoon above its head and smacked it on the concrete barrier that surrounds the drain pipe. The raccoon stopped struggling immediately, probably because the creature turned its head into ground meat. Then the creature just strolled off into the pond and down the creek into the darkness. I'm not sure what this creature was because it never turned its head so that I could see the shape of its face. And I couldn't tell if there were ears on the top of its head or if it was just a cone-shaped head. So no differentiating between Bigfoot and Dogman. Pretty much impossible because it was so dark and I was crapping my pants. This was over a year ago now and I haven't seen anything since. But I do get a little nervous whenever I hear the raccoons fighting. Now, I had a subscriber here. He was on the show. He had sent me his encounter, and I literally just getting ready for this upload tore apart my labeled unknown and worldwide encounters. I have so many encounters sent from you guys. It's amazing. But he was a truck driver from Ohio, and he was, I believe, oil. It was oil or gas. and he lived in the Cleveland area. I'm just going to go off of what I remember. He had pulled in, I think it was a Friday or something like that, end of the week, and he sees this Dogman on top of this building staring at him. And I'm really going to have to find this story because I cannot give it any justice. I'm not even going to try with that one. I will find it. But what he said is, after that, I'll find that encounter, I'll give it justice, but I remember this part. Where he lives in Cleveland was, there's some wooded areas out there, and he had heard some dogmen out in the back area, or a dogman. A lady he knew had seen one that came out of the woods into his backyard area, and big apartment complex. And he was just amazed at how, because Cleveland being a city, but it does have woods, he was amazed at the possibility of a creature like that being so close. Which, I mean, throughout all of this time, we know that they don't care. They have no borders. I'm really going to have to find these two encounters. I'll probably take all night looking for them. But I don't want to give them, I want to give them the justice they deserve. So I'm not going to wing it off the top of my head. I wish I could find them. I did try. I'll probably go through the rest of the states that I have left and a couple of other folders that I have, and then hopefully I find it. But that was it for the night, guys. Tomorrow we go over to Oklahoma, and oh my God, Oklahoma's folder is huge. So we'll have a good night with that as well. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for all your support. It truly means the world to me. Wow. I mean, we're not even midway done yet with subscriber encounters. I'm going to have to actually look at, I might do an upload midway of new encounters that I got submitted. That way I can knock a little bit of that folder down too. But I mean, yeah, we're only in Oklahoma starting tomorrow. We've got all the way up to Washington, not counting worldwide, and not counting subscribers that didn't mention where they had lived. So we got some good ones coming. The worldwide ones there's one that, well, there's two military, U.S. military ones from worldwide that just kind of blow my mind sometimes. Anyway, thank you for all the support. Be kind to each other, please, please. And may the Great Spirit watch over us all. And may He guide us down that thing we call life. Until later tonight, my friends on the paranormal side.